Liberation hero Chris Hani is being remembered today. On this day in 1993, the Secretary General of the South African Communist Party was assassinated by right-wing extremists outside his home. Hani was a member of the ANC. He joined the military wing Umkhonto Sizwe. He resigned to focus on the SACP and held his position as General Secretary from 1991 until his death in 1993. According to an SACP leader, his assassination was almost the spark that plunged South Africa into a potential civil war. A year later, there was a peaceful transition to democracy, though. Well, the Polish refugee Janusz Walus, as well as Clive Derby-Lewis, who was a member of the Conservative Party, were sentenced to death for his murder. Those sentences were later commuted to life behind bars. Clive Derby-Lewis was released in 2015 after 22 years due to a terminal lung cancer. He died the next year. Last year, Walus was denied bail. Let's speak now to Mondli Gungubele, who is the former mayor of Ekhuruleni and a member of the ANC's National Executive Committee. He was a friend of Chris Hani's and the first on the scene. Mr. Gungubele, thank you for being with us. This day is obviously etched in your mind forever. Take us back to 1993, if you don't mind. Tell us what you saw, how it dawned on you, how it sank in that your friend and a revered leader in this country had been killed.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your viewership. This refreshes one of the painful memories of the departure of one of the greatest moral and revolutionary compasses with character this country has ever had. A man who was effortlessly honest, who I would dare say was integrity himself. It was a painful moment because in 1993, on the 9th on the evening of April, he called me to say the following day, the 10th, he was going to post money for Neo, one of his eldest daughters, and he had asked his VIPs to actually take off that weekend. And he said I would use whatever posture of a military trained person, which I never was, although we were leading all the defense programs in the Israel. And the following day, as I was preparing to accompany him, he had already left before the time we had agreed upon the appointed time. And I went there to speak on the intercom at his place. Nomakwezi said he had left already. Myself and my family were planned a picnic just to take away from violence, which we were caught up in, and waited until 10 o'clock. He called and told me that he had apologizing for actually leaving without me as arranged, telling me that how he found himself in the congestion of people who wanted to speak to him. And at that time, he told me his last item was to take Nomakwezi for hairdressing. And once that was done, we would leave. At about 20 past 10, I got a call, a phone dropped, no one could speak. Later, Nomakwezi spoke to me on the phone to say, Uncle Mondli, please come, they've shot my dad. I went with one of the speeds that I could not explain, almost deranged, and to pick up Comrade Togi, who was the leader of the province then, took in my car, we went to see the worst scene ever, a revolutionary lying on the ground, with a hole on his occipitals, gorged by whatever weapon that was used. It was one of those most painful moments of my life. It had us, I remember for 7 days, I had a sense of derangement. My car ran into somebody's car. And a lot of things happened. Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We can't imagine what that feels like. If you talk about him as a man, you said Chris Hani was integrity itself or himself, and he is remembered as one of those selfless leaders. We often look back and say, you know, where have they all gone? The people who were willing to die for an ideal. Would you say that he was a product of the time where it was a life and death fight, where you had to nail your colors to a wall, or was he an extraordinary man even in the midst of the time he lived in?
Remember, there are a number of instances in Chris's life, defining moments. as one of the commanders of the Wanki the Tulu detachment, which crossed, I think, Zambezi River. His memorandum led to the crafting of one of the historic documents, which became a lodestar of the ANC 1969 strategy and technical documents, which crafted and smoothed the path that guided us towards freedom. Two, his death secured us the date to commit to a formal free South Africa in terms of the law, the election date. You can imagine how his life determined the path on which we are at the moment.
Yeah, so you're saying he actually ushered in those elections maybe earlier than they would have happened. Do you agree with that?
I suspect so, because immediately his death and the kind of potential time bomb is what our leaders went straight to government to say the only way our people could understand your sincerity after the death of such an icon was actually at least to commit to something concrete that was clearly ushering us to a new South Africa, at least election date, which indeed happened.
Yeah. Jeremy Cronin said that the assassination of Chris Hani nearly brought South Africa, or brought us to the brink of civil war. Explain the mood, the volatility, why the death of Chris Hani was nearly that spark.
Chris became the embodiment of thousands and millions of South Africans because of his closeness to them, because of himself being rooted amongst them. Remember, Comrade Chris used to travel during negotiations village to village, speaking to ordinary South Africa peasants, rural communities, briefing them about the nature and the state of negotiations. You can imagine all of us, I'm one of those people who were close to him, were beginning to get addicted to his intellectual teeth of change, his theory, his understanding, his vision of where this country was going. If you get dislodged by the departure of such a revolutionary, such a source of everything, such a reference for the future, such a compass, such an exemplary life, at a time when our country was going through a very delicate phase, the whole country felt dislodged, in my view.
So you say he's a compass, and it's often said, what would South Africa be like if Chris Hani was alive today? Let's talk about your opinion. Where do you think he would stand on the factionalism in the ANC, on the relationship right now between the members of the tripartite alliance?
Listen, it's always difficult to claim to know what he was going to say. But knowing what he stood for in practice and action, he stood for the liberation of the poor, the downtrodden, the vulnerable, and a lot of quotes where he defined socialism, that it meant access to water by the poor, access to health, access to transport, access to the basic things, sanitation, and all those basic things that secure the dignity of the ordinary people. Those are things he was prepared to die for. For instance, I remember on one of the days, he was interviewed in my presence, where he said to a journalist, he had no plans to join government. He had seen revolutions cheating the people. They were actually established to liberate. He wanted to stay outside and be part of the civil society to make sure that when ANC take over power, that power is used for the historic purpose for which ANC was established.
Yeah. And he was part of the ANC, but you mentioned, I think, 1969, the Hani memorandum, when Umkhonto, Sizwe leaders got together, and I think they outlined the frightening depth of the rot in the ANC. That is verbatim. So clearly he thought that the party should be self-critical if needs be. If there's corruption, you never sweep it under the table.
Chris Hani was clinical, and I say effortlessly honest. Let me share you one of the moments we met with him when we had a meeting with a forum of religious leaders in Thokoza, who were trying to advise us on how to make sure that we lead in a manner that you didn't allow the violence to lead an irreversible mire. We were impatient. I remember him reprimanding me and even threatening me to take me out of the meeting because I was impatient. And because of his undoubted motive, I never questioned that reprimand. But at the end of the meeting, he said to me, religious people are a material and component of leadership that was key in this country in helping us to achieve the stability. And they were very powerful, advising me never to actually show a middle finger to that component of society because they were so influential. And actually, he reorganized my attitudes toward the religious community at that moment. That's Chris for you. Remember, we went there as his followers, as his collective, and thinking that between us and him, there would not be such hate. But because we behave in a manner that threatened the very future for which we claim to be standing, Christian wouldn't waste time to tell any comrade that you are out of order. Immediately your behavior threatened the very essence of the mission that was being pursued by the collective.
Well, Mr. Gungubele, recently you have criticized, I understand, former President Jacob Zuma about his defiance of the Constitutional Court order that he stands before the Zondo Commission. Do you think that Chris Hani would have been with more modern SACP leaders, the same ones who called for Zuma to step down a few years ago?
Listen, the constitution of this country, even our revolutionary document, the strategy and tactic document, refers to this constitution as a core settlement of our transformation, of our path towards realizing the dream South Africa we want. My attitude is that Chris would not actually, in my view, take kindly to any behavior that undermines, as far as I'm concerned, the directive, the protocols that are key in ensuring the environment that protected change. Because if you mess up the laws of this country, you are undermining the minimum order within which all South Africans can have adjudication of their disputes, within which all South Africans can actually unleash their energies in an orderly and a very reliable way towards the new South. Remember, when we are orderly and legal, you secure the confidence of the investors. You secure the dreams of the young people who see their future in this country. You make them believe that this is the country where they can invest their future. But when you undermine the laws of this country, you are destabilizing the key tool that brings us together for a flourishing and a free South Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think he would have taken kindly to anyone who undermined what I view as a revolutionary tool, the law or the laws of this country.
Okay, so we can speculate on his attitude towards the Zuma presidency as well. But what about his relationship with other leaders? A lot of talk about a possible rivalry. Was that happening between him and Thabo Mbeki?
Listen, with the short time I had with him, there was I think it was 1992 when there was concern about negotiations not delivering as expected. Nelson Mandela declared to lead the civil disorder when people were killed, the prisoners not being released. It was a huge march of August, I think, 2nd and 3rd. And after that march in Pretoria, we were sitting in his place. He just out of the blue said to me, the Chris of the ANC, of the movement, can never be a Thabo. And there's one Slovo, there's one Thabo, there's one Chris. Trying to say to me, these three cadres had their unique role in this transformation, which would not actually be, no one amongst them could take the role of the other. In my view, he was acknowledging the unique role that Comrade Thabo is playing. And that, to me, could not be displaying tension or rivalry or hatred amongst them.
All right, well, we appreciate you. You've been incredibly frank with us tonight and given us this amazing insight. Finally, I mean, so we spoke about this being a possible spark for civil war. He was certainly so popular throughout his tenure. And I remember a foreigner, a relative of mine, came wearing a Chris Hani T-shirt. So the world was watching him. What was the Chris Hani X factor? What was it about him that was so magnetic, I think is the word that you've used?
You see, my experience about human psychology has taught me that a predictable environment, an environment that is consistent, is an environment within which people are able to plan their futures in, are able to release their energy in, are able to plan their long-term life in. And that environment to be sustained need leaders who have got integrity, who are predictable, who are credible. When you have such an element in society like him, and especially during difficult times, I think a lot of people in South Africa were looking up to him to rely that as long as he was a key player, the future of this country was guaranteed. You cannot, therefore, it can't be surprising how his death shocked and made millions felt dislodged.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for taking us back to a day that really shocked you. That was ANC NEC member Mondli Gungubele, a friend of Chris Hani and one of the first on the scene when he was assassinated.